This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. We are talking this morning, and that's a mistake. It's not this morning. It takes us through the full calendar of life, what we're going to be talking about. Sarah, good morning.
Good
Jeremy,
morning.
good morning.
Good
And
morning.
the two of us this morning are going to be talking about the fullness of life. And even that very title, The Fullness of Life, has a suggestion that it's across the board, which is quite correct. So the time is not the restriction. People will listen to this when and how it suits. I am Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley, co-host Sarah Benton, and I am the Voice of Respectonomics. And this particular discussion is the counterpoint to the one we did earlier, which was the life of business. This is called the fullness of life. And we make a distinction between the two because one has a strong sort of business context to it. This one has a life context to it, how we live. So if I may start you off, Sarah, without rolling eyes.
Never rolling eyes.
Never rolling eyes. And you know, and this one is not Latin and it is not Greek that I'm bringing to the table.
Oh, wow.
I am bringing grammar to the table this time.
Okay.
Yeah. And this time I want you to look really thrilled. Just once.
I'm very excited.
Okay. I can hear it. The fullness of life is an adjectival phrase. It's not an adverbial phrase. It's an adjectival phrase.
Okay.
So if I say I have a box of chocolates, that is an adjectival phrase. If I say I have a crate of apples, that is an adjectival phrase. Because the of part modifies and explains what that crate is for.
Okay.
And the fullness of life has something in it that I think we need to address very carefully and very clearly. Most people today, I'll start on a sort of what is going on. And that is, I think most people today feel their lives are excessively full, that they feel that they're being pulled and pushed in many, many different directions. And
so full from a different vantage point.
This is where the full part becomes very critical to the discussion.
Yes.
If I have a pitcher or that I'm going to fill with water, this is a physical truth. When the jug, the pitcher is full, it is full. And any water that I add thereafter will spill. I don't need to go to a physics sort of convocation to find that out. I know it on the mahogany table at home, where I have spilt water and somebody has said, don't you realize you've put more water in the jug than it should have? Have you ever watered flowers and found the water going over the edge of the vase? It has happened. So fullness is an interesting word. And the reason this to us, I think, is respectonomics is so important. Respectonomics has its focus on the dignity, the sovereignty, if you will, of human life. And the word fullness of life is probably better seen in the sense that life in itself is the fullness. When we accept that life is full, period, then I think we've got a far better chance of finding out what things we need to take out of our lives and what things we need to add into our lives. Truth of the matter is, when you and I have spilt water onto that mahogany table, I'm assuming it didn't land on just a nice sort of, Formica plasticky top. It went on and did some damage, yes?
Yeah.
And then you have to get rid of the watermarks and all that. Yeah. The point of the matter is this, that the water that we add to this jug, when it spills over, is in fact a waste. So in other words, when things are coming into the full jug, regardless of whether they are even good or bad, if they're bad things that are coming in, by definition, they permeate through the jug of water, and at the same time, they are spilling over into other parts of our lives. Therefore, and the good part is, so when the water comes in, but now we can't accommodate it, we have another issue there because that goodness is now being wasted. And in fact, it creates damage. So understanding that life in itself is the fullness thereof, I think is a very useful starting gate. And when we find ourselves, being pulled and pushed, the starting gate is to recognize that one's own life is full.
Right.
It's lovely. It is full. Then we need to understand that the stuff that's being added in, and we're going to talk about the two things that are being added in, the good things and the bad things.
Yeah.
And the good things that come into our life. And there's an old story that was given by Benjamin Franklin many, many years ago. And it was a little fable of the child that is given an apple and the child smiles. The child is given 2 apples, puts the apple in the other hand, smiles even bigger. And then he's given a 3rd apple that he cannot hold and bursts into tears.
Right.
So when we find ourselves with an exuberance and excess of the good things, it can create a lot of damage. So the first thing we need to do is to understand that those 2 apples are in and of themselves a source of great pleasure, a source of a great blessing, and they are sufficient. So in other words, understanding the sufficiency of life is as important as recognizing other things we may want to add to our lives.
Interesting.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Funny because it's prompting this thought in my mind that I've heard many organizers say, for example, that teaching you rules for going forward once they've organized your home or your
Yeah.
space. It's as something new comes in, decide what is old, or let me rephrase that, may not necessarily be old, or an item that is no longer of use to you, you're doing a swap.
Yeah.
So that you're not constantly compiling, you're
Right.
doing a swap.
Well, I have another answer under the heading of respectonomics.
Yeah.
And I think that the dignity of the human being is exponential. As a matter of fact, I think it has no limits. It has no boundaries. It's something that is infinite in terms of giving and receiving. It adds all the time. So I think when our lives appear to be excessively full,
Yes.
actually one of the things we should do is to enlarge the size of the container. If the container is bigger, it can accommodate more of those good things that you were just referencing without necessarily ditching stuff. We'll come on
But
to
now we're thinking about ourselves as expansion as opposed to, for example, get a bigger house.
Yeah, this is where but that's what we touched on it a moment ago. Being content with what you've got,
Yeah.
the wonderful starting gate. I mean, you've heard me use the Latin expression by Mr. Horace, the Roman poet. Sonavi apud meum, which means I had supper at my table. The straightforward things in life are generally the ones that give us the most pleasure. The expansion that I'm talking about is there are so many strengths, blessings, enjoyments in life. Generally, they're free, candidly, friendship, all of these things that we can add into our lives. And we almost have this ghastly feeling of, I haven't got room for them. And what I'm pointing to is, I think you're right. If you turn this into a material expansion of, I want a bigger house, a bigger car, we can get ourselves into a lot of trouble.
Absolutely.
The problem with that material expansion is it's never satisfied.
I was going to say it doesn't equate happiness.
No, it does not. So,
or fulfillment. Yeah.
Exactly. So the contentment, what we're talking about is being able to say, I have a life which is full. I have a life that I would like to enlarge so that I can take in more of nature, more of the other human blessings that are available to us. And if we're going to do that, I need to enlarge the container.
Right.
So you're not really enlarging it in the sense of being avaricious or greedy. You're rather doing it from the standpoint of recognizing the gifts that are being made available to you. You're saying, I'm in a place to receive them. Right. And in order to do that, one of the most powerful tools that we have, well, there are 2 of them. One of them is gratitude. Every time we say, thank you. Yeah, it's incredible. It's one of the greatest gifts we could all have, that when we express gratitude, it happened to me yesterday at the pharmacy, and I was there getting whatever it was on a Sunday, which kind of everybody has their feelings about that. And then the fellow behind the counter, I said to him, I said, "How on the earth did you get landed with working today? Beautiful day." And he said, "Well, it was my slot or row, whatever it is, term." I said, "Well, that's great. Thank you." And then just as I was leaving the counter, put my hand out and said, "I want to thank you for making it possible for me to come in this morning." And his face just lit up, and he shook my hand and he said, "I really appreciate the encouragement."
Mhm.
That
I was
was,
gonna say he feels appreciated, he feels his time and expertise
Mhm.
are valued,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So I think this issue of gratitude, the issue of thankfulness, is one that enlarges our container, enlarges our life actually in a limitless way. So when I feel that our lives have got sort of boundaries to them, there is no boundary to gratitude.
Right.
And the same applies to dignity. Dignity is I almost don't understand the physics of it, but we were always taught at school there's no such thing as perpetual motion. And scientists today are desperately trying to find new ways of creating energy that will build on itself. I can't remember if it's called fission or fusion, whatever it's called. But the point of the matter is, when we dignify somebody else, I dignify me. When you dignify me, you dignify you.
Right.
Dignity and gratitude are two wonderful symbiotic railway tracks that have a great deal to do with expanding the whole scope of our humanity. And therefore, that's how you get the pot to be bigger.
Right, right.
So life comes fuller when we say thank you. Life comes fuller when we dignify other people. Dignifying another person doesn't mean necessarily saying thank you. Dignifying the other person is just looking at them and recognizing the fullness of who they are.
It could be
Not
a simple s smile in all honesty.
absolutely.
Eye
Yeah,
contact with somebody and a
yeah,
smile, you have no idea
yeah, yeah.
the potential impact that may have on them depending upon what's
Right.
going on in their right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that
Doesn't have to
list
be a
goes,
big it doesn't have to be a grand gesture.
well, yes, but grand gestures are fun,
Ah, they absolutely are.
and I would never use them. Ha ha ha. Exactly. But moving on, what want to think a bit about here is that we also recognize that there are things in our lives that are taking up space. You just mentioned that.
Yeah.
And I want to be very careful about this because there's always this sort of that sort of cyclical sense of, well, I'm adding A, so I should get rid of B, or I'm adding J and I should get rid of K. I mean, that kind of thing. And one of the things I find interesting is, have you noticed that archaeologists will go around excavating and looking for interesting things? I think we should do that in our lives. I think we should become our built-in archaeologist and start looking retrospectively at the things that have been built into our lives. Because I have a feeling that a lot of those things are being unused, underused, or ignored, for a start,
Aware of them,
aware of them. And have you
lost sight of them.
noticed, yeah, have you noticed when the archaeologist is in, they're putting in a new shopping mall or something, and then they find bones while they're digging around, and these archaeologists descend on the scene. Have you ever watched the footage, the film footage? The archaeologists get so excited. They go, "Look what we have found. We have found a Roman coin, for example, with Latin written all over it. Can you imagine?" Anyway, point of the story is, I think if we do the archaeology on ourselves, we find some really, really hidden gems. That's why I'm a little leery of the idea of I'm adding A, take out B, because I have a feeling there's a lot of stuff underneath B that's very valuable and ought to be brought to the surface and allowed to migrate into the new parts of our lives. And if we're expanding the scope of our life anyway, we have room not only to receive the new things, but to take advantage of the old.
Agreed. I agree, and I'm going to challenge you as well to
Go on.
say
I'm ready.
sometimes so I'm now gonna remove the physical
Yeah.
example that that I
Yeah.
was sharing in terms of, from a
Yeah.
clutter standpoint.
Right. Right.
I'm going to challenge that from absolutely, I do believe that past experiences absolutely add value and expand. I
Mhm.
do think there are times or space or scenarios or situations where you are full and you're at capacity. I guess it depends how we're defining what our fullness and capacity is
Right.
and speak to that situation. But I do feel there are times where it is better for us to remove certain things
Mhm.
in order to continue to be full or to
Right.
fulfill. There's a difference, I guess.
Sarah, you're right. And that is, there are things that need to come out of our lives. Sometimes it's because we're going to put a new door handle in, which is better than the one we had before. That is materially, physically, absolutely the case. I agree. But there's one other part, and that is some of the flotsam in our lives is hurt and pain and anger, which anytime we have all of those, they take up space. When I'm ticked off with somebody, that tick off takes up space in my life and it excludes the ability of new stuff to come in.
Right.
Therefore, if I'm going to clean out the desk drawer of my life, then I need to identify, as you would say, be aware of whether it's the anger, whether it's the contempt, whether it's the embarrassment, the shame, the guilt, all those nasty words, they need to be addressed. And the one word that I'm going to address, because I can do so personally, and that is when we experience anger or contempt or spite for somebody, it is far better to let that person go to its own funeral and, in other words, forgive them. That creates more space in our lives for the good things and the fresh things and the living things, in my own case, more than anything.
But I think that's what I mean by that's partly you letting go,
Absolutely. But
releasing,
it's
creating
but
space,
it's
right?
but it's also intentional.
Mhm.
It's not
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I mean, the door handle is an interesting example because the door handle is, oh, it's come off its hinge or whatever you'd call it, and I've got to get a new one. That is very mechanical, and we
Right.
we do that. What I'm talking about is intentionally looking for those things in my life that are taking up space.
Yeah.
You're talking about some of the things that are just taking up space. I'm talking about some of the things that are worse than that. They're the toxins in my life. And the toxins are
Absolutely.
taking up space. And I'm suggesting one of the ways to get rid of toxins is through intentional forgiveness. The truth of the matter is, the only person who's being captive or being put in jail by that spite for other people is me.
Mhm.
Me that's being hurt. And it's me that is taking up space with things that actually there's far more room for the goodness of life and the goodness of other people and friendship and so on.
I think we're on the same page
Mhm. Mhm.
because I'm not specifically
No,
talking about physical, right?
no, no. Now, I want to, if I may, conclude with one other thing,
Yeah.
and that is we live in a world of finger pointing. Now,
Oh boy, do we ever.
okay, well, here's a little bit of a gem for you, and that is this one you've heard 100 times. And that is when you point a finger at somebody, there are three fingers pointing back at you. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I want to try another technique with finger pointing.
Okay.
And that is, and I wish if this was on screen, it would be much easier, but it's important for us actually to experiment ourselves. But I'd like you to point a finger at your computer or whatever you want, but just point a finger at it. Okay. And what you just did was very interesting. If you do that more slowly, you'll notice, and I say slowly, more by observation, you'll notice that your thumb was actually held over those three fingers.
Mhm.
That's very interesting. If you leave the thumb sticking up, it looks like a revolver. So we're going to agree we don't want to do that,
Sure.
correct? So we're pointing the finger, but instead of pointing the finger in anger, it's amazing what happens when you point the finger with love, or
Mhm.
point it with compassion, or point it with any of those great attributes that we can do under the general heading of dignity. When I point a finger, let's say at nature, and I point that finger at nature for all she's done for me. What fascinates me is that I have my thumb clasped over those three fingers at the same time, the ones that are pointing back. And those three fingers are exactly the representation or the expression of body, mind, and soul. So when we point a finger, point it at the good things in life and see how that goodness comes back quite literally, and we bind it to ourselves in body and mind and soul. So let's get finger pointing.
I like it.
Thank you.
In the right direction.
Well, that's right. It's direction and it's intentional. It's
Absolutely.
very interesting. And it once you start pointing your finger at nature, it becomes a little bit tacky to say, "Oh, I'm pointing my finger at a politician I don't like." That individual or that circumstance is small potatoes compared with the magnitude of the universe and the constellations and all the other things that we can look at. Point the finger at the sun. It's an exciting exercise. Therein lies the story of the fullness of life.
There we are.
Yeah. So, as always, I rest my case.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was interesting.
Thank you, Sarah.